It all begins with a dinner that seems perfect. Crystal glasses, soft music, a room filled with wealth and applause. But when a powerful millionaire loses control and tapes the mouth of his pregnant wife right in front of everyone just to please his mistress, the empire he inherited from his own mother begins to crumble slowly. What follows is not just revenge, but a reckoning led by that very 60-year-old mother, a woman who turns silence into strength and exposes everything he tried to hide. Stay with me, because this is a story about justice, compassion, and the price of learning too late what love truly means. Tell me what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Under the chandelier of the Hale mansion, light spilled like liquid glass across the long mahogany table. Dozens of guests leaned toward crystal plates, their laughter precise and rehearsed, the sound of privilege disguised as warmth. The room smelled of wine and roses. Outside, rain pressed against the windows, a steady whisper that no one cared to hear. Emma Hale sat at the far end, her hands folded over the curve of her stomach. 7 months along, she had learned to measure her breathing, to keep her pulse quiet. The child inside her stirred, a faint flutter beneath silk, as if sensing the tension that never left the air. Adrian Hale raised his glass, the practiced smile of a man who never lost control. His suit fit perfectly, his cufflinks gleamed, and his words flowed with the polished ease that made investors trust him. "To loyalty," he said. The guests repeated the word, glasses chiming together. Emma forced a small smile. Across the table, Cassandra Voss tilted her head and let out a laugh, too soft, too deliberate. The laughter lingered, tracing invisible lines between them. Cassandra's hand brushed Adrian's sleeve. "Your wife looks tired," she murmured, just loud enough for nearby ears to catch. A ripple of polite discomfort moved through the table. Adrian did not flinch. Emma lifted her gaze to meet Cassandra's and saw the glint of satisfaction hiding in her eyes. She said quietly, "I'm fine." Her voice barely carried, but the quiet only sharpened it. "The baby just moves a lot at night." Cassandra leaned back, feigning concern. "Poor thing. I can't imagine the stress of public events in her condition." The words sounded innocent, but the tone was honey dipped in venom. Adrian's jaw tightened. He set his glass down. "Cassandra," he said lightly, "you worry too much." His smile did not reach his eyes. "Emma is used to pressure. Aren't you, darling?" Emma nodded, though the movement cost her. The room was suddenly too bright. The violinist in the corner changed tempo, but the melody stumbled. Conversation thinned. A waiter passed behind her, the scent of champagne crisp in the air. Emma whispered, "Adrian, maybe we should—" He raised a hand. The gesture silenced her as effectively as any word. His fingers, long and tense, tapped once against the tablecloth. Cassandra's laugh broke the pause. "She's always interrupting you," she said, smiling to the guests as if sharing a private joke. "How do you ever get a word in?" The crowd offered nervous chuckles. Adrian's shoulders stiffened. Emma's breath hitched. The sound of rain outside grew louder, or maybe it was her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She touched the table's edge, steadying herself. "Please stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. Not in front of them. Adrian's face shifted. The smile vanished. He looked at her as if she had just broken some unspoken rule. "You're making a scene," he said. Cassandra pressed her lips together to hide her grin. "Let her go upstairs if she's emotional," Cassandra suggested. "Pregnancy does such strange things to women." The words cracked something in him. Pride, irritation, the need to prove control, whatever it was, it rose fast. Adrian stood, his chair scraping against marble. The room froze. "Enough," he said. "Do you see what you do, Emma?" Every time. His voice thundered across the table. "You turn simple evenings into public disasters." Emma's hands shook. "I'm just asking you to stop embarrassing me," she said softly. The trembling of her lip was small, but it cut through the air like glass. Cassandra leaned forward. "She's always so dramatic," she murmured to him, just loud enough. "If you love me, make her stop." The line fell like a dare. Adrian looked at Cassandra, then back at Emma, and something in his expression hardened into cruelty. He reached across the table, grabbed the silver roll of tape that had been lying beside a stack of gift envelopes, part of the evening's decor, brought by Cassandra to seal donation letters. The guests gasped, but no one moved. "Adrian, don't," Emma whispered. Her chair scraped backward. The chandelier's light caught the silver tape as he tore a strip free. The sound ripped through the silence. He stepped toward her, his breath sharp, his voice low. "You want quiet? Then be quiet." Before she could stand, he pressed the tape over her mouth. The adhesive clung to her skin, cold and metallic. The shock stole her breath. Her eyes widened, reflecting the shimmer of crystal lights above. A murmur spread through the room, half disbelief, half fear. No one stood up. Not one person said stop. Cassandra's expression flickered between triumph and disbelief. She lifted her glass slowly, watching Emma struggle for air. "See?" she said softly. "Peace at last." The words were meant for him alone, but they carried far enough for others to hear. Emma's muffled sound barely escaped behind the silver barrier. Tears blurred her vision. Her pulse raced beneath her ribs, each beat against the weight of silence. The child inside her kicked once, a desperate echo of her own panic. Adrian exhaled, as if releasing tension. "Finally," he said, his voice calm again. "Now we can enjoy dinner." He turned toward the guests with the poise of a man pretending nothing had happened. A waiter dropped a fork. The metallic ring echoed across the marble floor. The music had stopped completely. The only sound left was rain. Emma tried to breathe through her nose, her chest rising unevenly. Her hands gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. She looked around, faces turned away, eyes lowered. Cassandra smiled faintly, tilting her head toward Adrian like an accomplice sharing victory. No one reached for her. No one dared. The chandelier flickered once, its crystal shadows trembling on the walls. Somewhere above, a small red light blinked, unseen by all but the ceiling itself. The camera lens glowed faintly, recording everything. Emma's eyes caught it for an instant, just a glimmer of crimson between the reflections of glass. She didn't understand what it was, but the sight held her still. The rain outside intensified, a steady rhythm against the silence. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks and sat back down. "Let's eat," he said. His voice was smooth, almost casual. Cassandra clapped her hands once, forcing a laugh. A few guests tried to mimic her, but their voices cracked under the weight of the moment. Emma's vision blurred. The chandelier seemed to sway. Her heart beat fast enough that she feared the baby could feel every tremor of her fear. The tape tasted of metal and salt. She blinked away tears, staring at her husband through the shimmer of candlelight. He avoided her gaze. Cassandra leaned toward him, whispering something that made him nod. The crowd began to move again, uncertain, desperate to pretend the evening could still be saved. But the air had changed. It no longer belonged to them. The final image froze in the silence. Emma's face turned toward the ceiling, eyes wet, the silver tape gleaming under the chandelier like a cruel ornament. And high above, the tiny red light of the camera watched, unblinking, capturing the moment the world forgot to breathe. The music never started again. The silence sat heavy in the room, thick and paralyzing, pressing against every wall of the grand dining hall. The chandeliers still shimmered, but their light felt colder now, as if the bulbs themselves disapproved of what they had just seen. Emma Hale sat rigid in her chair, her back stiff, her breath shallow. The silver tape across her mouth caught the reflections of the candles, flashing every time her chest rose in small, broken attempts to breathe. Around her, people froze in elegant poses, afraid to move. Forks lay mid-air, half-filled wine glasses trembled in fingers. No one dared to speak. The air smelled of iron and perfume. Adrian sat calmly in his seat, straightening his tie as if nothing had happened. His composure was more terrifying than his rage had been. He cut a small piece of steak, the knife gliding cleanly through the meat. The sound was louder than it should have been. Every scrape of silverware, a wound in the silence. Cassandra Voss watched him closely. Her red lips parted slightly, almost forming a smile, then closed again. She pretended to look concerned, lowering her gaze just enough to appear innocent. But there was something in her eyes, a shimmer of victory. She had wanted a demonstration, and she had gotten one. She reached for her wine and took a slow sip, her manicured fingers trembling only for effect. Emma tried to move her hands, but her fingers slipped on the edge of the tablecloth. The baby kicked once, a sharp jolt beneath her ribs. Panic spread through her veins. She forced herself to inhale through her nose, every breath sharp and painful. Her vision swam with light. Across the table, she caught sight of Martha Lewis, the housekeeper who had served this family for years. Martha's wrinkled hands were clenched at her apron, her eyes wide, glistening. Their gazes met for one instant. Martha's lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her head. Adrian glanced toward her. "Martha," he said evenly, "clear these plates. The food is getting cold." The woman froze. Her throat worked, but her feet would not move. The silence stretched again until it hurt to exist in it. Adrian's tone sharpened. "Now." She nodded and began collecting dishes with shaking hands. The clinking porcelain sounded like a funeral bell. Emma's eyes followed her, pleading silently. Martha's hand brushed the edge of Emma's chair as she passed, a quiet touch of apology. Then she disappeared toward the kitchen. Cassandra leaned in. "You see? Order restored," she whispered. Adrian gave a faint nod. "Peace," he said. His voice was smooth again, almost gentle. He looked at his guests, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Please, everyone, enjoy your meal." But no one lifted a fork. The air refused to move. A man near the window coughed, then murmured something about the weather. A woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The entire room seemed to shrink away from itself, as if the walls were leaning inward. Emma's tears soaked the edge of the tape. She tried to speak, but her voice only echoed inside her skull. She stared down at her reflection in the polished table, her face distorted by candlelight, the silver across her mouth, making her look less than human. For a second, she did not recognize herself. The shame burned hotter than fear. Her breath hitched again. The baby shifted restlessly, a reminder that she was not alone. She pressed her palm against her stomach, a trembling act of protection. The movement caught Adrian's eye. He frowned. "Stop that," he said quietly. "You are making people uncomfortable." Cassandra giggled, a nervous tinkling sound that died almost instantly. "She just needs rest, Adrian. Maybe she should go upstairs. I'll help her." "No," Adrian said. "She'll stay." His voice filled the space like a law. Cassandra looked at him, feigning obedience, though irritation flared across her face. She wanted attention, not silence. But he ignored her, cutting another piece of steak with mechanical precision. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the windows with long ribbons of water. Lightning flashed, a pale reflection rippling across Emma's tear-streaked cheeks. The chandelier flickered once, its crystals swaying slightly, sending shards of light onto the silver tape. It looked almost like jewelry now, cruel and glittering. A waiter entered hesitantly from the side door, his shoes squeaking on the marble floor. He stopped short when he saw Emma. The tray in his hands trembled. "Sir, dessert?" he asked. His voice cracked on the last word. Adrian didn't look up. "No dessert tonight." The waiter backed away, almost stumbling. The door closed behind him, sealing the silence again. Cassandra turned to the guests, her voice low and smooth. "Mr. Hale values discipline," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm sure we can all understand." Her tone carried a hidden edge, daring anyone to disagree. No one did. Some guests began whispering, their words barely audible. Others stared at their plates, pretending not to exist. Emma felt the walls closing in. Every breath scraped against the tape. Her head pounded, the edges of her vision blurred. She wanted to scream, to tear the world open. Instead, she stayed still. The only sound, her muffled sob beneath the silver. The humiliation was complete. The silence of others hurt more than the act itself. Adrian finished his meal. He folded his napkin neatly and set it beside his plate. "See?" he said softly. "Everything stays quiet when people remember their place." The words hung in the air like poison. Cassandra nodded faintly, though her hands twisted together under the table. She had gotten what she wanted, a display of control. But even she could feel the unease crawling along her skin. She looked around and saw only fear staring back. Emma's gaze drifted upward again, drawn to the faint red light above the chandelier. It blinked once, then again. She did not know what it meant, but somehow it felt like the only witness she could trust. The small pulse of light seemed alive, steady and watching, while everything human around her had turned to stone. The rain grew louder, merging with the silence like a heartbeat buried under glass. Adrian poured himself another drink. The ice clinked softly, a private applause for his own performance. Cassandra watched him, her smile fading. Martha reappeared in the doorway, pale, trembling, her hands empty. She looked toward Emma, then at Adrian, and whispered, "Sir, should I?" Adrian cut her off with a single glance. She stepped back. The door closed again. Time crawled. The candles burned lower. The scent of smoke mixed with the iron tang of fear. Emma sat unmoving, her tears dried to salt. Around her, the room had become a museum of silence. Every guest was a statue carved from guilt and privilege. Her heartbeat slowed. She felt the baby's small movement, gentle this time, as if calming her. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, something stirred, a thin thread of defiance that had not yet died. She looked up once more at the blinking red light, and for the first time that night, she stopped looking at Adrian. She stopped looking at anyone at all. She stared only at the ceiling, where the camera's faint glow pulsed steady and patient, recording every second of the silence that would soon matter. The rain did not stop. The chandelier swayed gently, a whisper of motion in a room frozen by shame. And through that stillness, the camera's light blinked once more, like the smallest heartbeat in the dark. Rain blurred the windshield as Eleanor Hale steered her car through the gates of the estate. The wipers cut back and forth, slicing through streaks of water, but her vision stayed fixed and clear. On the passenger seat, her phone replayed the last seconds of the video, the trembling image from the camera above the chandelier. It showed her daughter-in-law seated, motionless, a silver band pressed across her mouth. The picture froze there. Eleanor's hand tightened on the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She had known Adrian could be cruel. Ambition had carved empathy out of him years ago, but she had never imagined this. The faint glow of the screen lit her face as she whispered, "What have you done?" When she reached the front door, the rain had softened to mist. The guards at the gate hesitated when they saw her. No one stopped Eleanor Hale when she chose to enter her own house. She stepped inside without removing her coat. The echo of her heels broke the quiet corridor leading to the dining room. The air inside was heavy with perfume and smoke. The guests had not left. They stood in clusters, their conversations stifled into murmurs. At the head of the table, Adrian sat with a glass of scotch in his hand. Cassandra Voss leaned against the back of his chair, one hand resting on his shoulder like a claim. Eleanor paused at the threshold. The crystal chandelier threw silver across her gray hair and sharp features. She spoke softly, but the sound carried. "Turn off the music." There was no music, only silence. The order still made every head turn. Adrian looked up. For a brief second, the confident mask on his face faltered. "Mother," he said, forcing a smile. "You're here late." She took 2 steps forward. Her eyes went past him to Emma. The young woman sat slumped slightly, her face streaked with tears that had dried beneath the edges of the tape. Eleanor's chest tightened. She walked closer until her hand rested lightly on the back of Emma's chair. "Who did this?" she asked quietly. Cassandra's laugh cracked the stillness. "She was hysterical," she said. Adrian only wanted peace. Eleanor turned her gaze on the woman, and the laughter died in Cassandra's throat. "You call this peace?" Her voice was calm, not raised, but it carried the weight of command. "Remove it." Adrian hesitated. "Mother, she—" "Remove it," Eleanor repeated. The tremor beneath her words made even the servants freeze. Adrian's hand moved automatically. He peeled the tape from Emma's mouth. The sound was small but sharp. Emma gasped, drawing air into her lungs as if it might vanish again. She touched her swollen lips and looked up at Eleanor. The older woman nodded once, a silent promise that she had seen everything. Eleanor turned to the guests. "Leave," she said. No one moved. "Now." Chairs scraped. Heels clicked. Doors opened and closed. The room emptied quickly. Cassandra lingered a moment, but one glance from Eleanor sent her retreating. When the door shut, only 4 people remained. Eleanor, Adrian, Emma, and the silent housekeeper Martha, who hovered near the doorway, trembling. Eleanor placed her phone on the table and tapped the screen. The image of Adrian pressing the tape appeared, projected in cold light. She let it play until the room filled with the echo of his voice saying, "You want quiet? Then be quiet." Then she paused the video and looked at him. "You did this in my house," she said. Adrian's composure cracked. "It was a misunderstanding," he began. She provoked. Eleanor raised her hand and the excuse died. "No," she said. You provoked yourself." Her voice softened, but the softness was sharper than anger. "You've forgotten who built the empire you hide behind. You use my name, my company, my legacy, and you shame it." Adrian's mouth tightened. "You think you can come here and humiliate me in front of her?" He gestured toward Emma. Eleanor's gaze did not waver. "You've already humiliated yourself." She reached into her bag and drew out a small silver USB drive. It gleamed under the chandelier. "Everything you did tonight was recorded. Not only this act, but every word that led to it. You'll hear from my lawyer in the morning." Adrian's face drained of color. "Mother, enough." Her voice cut cleanly through his plea. "If you care for anything left of your name, you'll listen carefully. From this moment, every asset under the Hale Group returns to my control. The transfer papers are ready. I warned you once, Adrian. I told you that the cost of cruelty is everything you own." Cassandra stepped forward. "You can't do that. The company is—" Eleanor looked at her, eyes cold as stone. "You have no place here." Cassandra's breath caught. For the first time, fear replaced arrogance. She backed away until she reached the doorway, then turned and disappeared into the hall. Eleanor faced her son again. The silence between them was almost unbearable. She could hear the rain tapping against the tall windows, the faint hum of the chandelier's lights. "I did not come here to argue," she said. "I came to make something very clear." She walked to Emma, gently touched her shoulder. "You will go upstairs," she said softly. "Martha will help you pack. You are leaving this house tonight." Emma tried to speak, but her voice failed. She only nodded, her eyes shimmering with gratitude and confusion. Eleanor turned back to Adrian, her expression unreadable. "You will not follow her. You will not call her. If you do, the world will see more than this video. It will see what kind of man you've become." Adrian stood silent. His throat worked, but no words came. Eleanor gathered her phone and the USB, slipping them into her coat pocket. "You think money makes you powerful?" she said quietly. "But power dies the moment it forgets mercy." She moved toward the door, pausing beside the chair where the tape still lay. The strip of silver caught the light again. She picked it up, held it between her fingers, and looked at it for a long time. Then she set it down on his plate. "That," she said, "is what your love looks like." No one spoke. The rain pressed harder against the windows. Eleanor turned, her coat sweeping behind her as she walked away. At the doorway, she stopped once more and said without looking back, "From this moment on, everything you have is mine, and everything she lost, I will return to her." She left the room. The echo of her footsteps faded down the marble corridor. In the dining hall, Adrian stood frozen, staring at the strip of tape glinting on his plate. Emma's quiet sobs followed her mother-in-law into the hall, a fragile sound of life inside a house that had forgotten it. Eleanor Hale did not wait for morning. By the time the first line of gray light touched the mansion windows, she was already dressed in a navy coat, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression carved from quiet resolve. The storm had passed, leaving a sky pale and heavy with dawn. Inside, the house smelled of extinguished candles and cold wine. The night's chaos had drained the air of its warmth. At the end of the corridor, two private security officers stood where the butler used to. They were men from her own foundation, summoned through a call placed only hours before. When she spoke, her voice was low but absolute. "No one leaves the property until I say so." They nodded and took their posts. Eleanor stepped into the dining hall. The aftermath of the previous night still lingered like a ghost. The silver tape remained where she had placed it, a dull curl of metal against Adrian's empty plate. The chandelier lights flickered faintly, their crystals catching the pale sunrise. She pressed her fingers to the back of a chair, steadying herself. She could not afford emotion now. Martha, the housekeeper, entered quietly, her face drawn. "Mrs. Hale, the doctor has arrived. He's waiting with your daughter-in-law in the East Wing." Eleanor nodded. "Good. Have the car ready to take her to Street Helena's. She'll be admitted for the rest of her pregnancy." Martha hesitated. "And Mr. Hale?" Eleanor's eyes turned cold. "He stays exactly where he is." Adrian appeared in the doorway a moment later, unshaven, his tie missing, the crisp lines of his usual appearance gone. He looked less like a millionaire now, and more like a frightened child who had lost his bearings. "Mother," he said hoarsely. "We need to talk." "No," she replied, still looking at the table. "You need to listen." He took a step closer, his voice unsteady. "You can't just walk in and take everything from me. This company, this house, it's mine," she cut in, her voice sharp but calm. "It has always been mine. You only borrowed it while I let you." He stopped mid-sentence, disbelief crossing his face. "You can't be serious." Eleanor opened the leather folder on the table and laid out a set of documents. Each page was stamped with legal seals, each signature precise. "This is the power of attorney you signed when I made you acting CEO 5 years ago. It grants me full control in the event of moral misconduct, negligence, or public scandal. You have met all 3 conditions in one night." Adrian's face blanched. "You wouldn't!" "I already have." She gestured to one of the guards. "The papers have been delivered to the board. You no longer represent the Hale Group." The words hung heavy in the air. Cassandra Voss entered quietly from the hallway, her red dress from the night before crumpled, her mascara faintly smeared. "This is insane," she said. "You can't ruin his life over one argument." Eleanor turned her gaze on her. "One argument?" She stepped closer, her tone soft but lethal. "You watched a pregnant woman's mouth being taped shut and called it love. That is not an argument. That is cruelty performed for applause." Cassandra flinched. "You don't understand." Oh, I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "You wanted his power. Now you will stand beside him when that power burns." She motioned toward the guards. "Escort Miss Voss out of the house. She is not to return." The guards obeyed. Cassandra tried to protest, but her words tangled into sobs as they guided her toward the door. Adrian stood frozen, his hands trembling at his sides. "Mother, please," he whispered. "You're humiliating me." Eleanor met his eyes. "No, you humiliated yourself when you mistook fear for respect." He lowered his gaze, unable to respond. She walked to the fireplace and took down a framed photo of her late husband holding Adrian as a child. Her eyes softened briefly. "I lived through this once," she said quietly. "I watched your father destroy everything he touched until there was nothing left to love. I thought you would be different. I raised you to be better." Adrian swallowed hard. "I'm not him. En faux. You are worse," she said, turning back to him. "Because you had an example and still chose the same path." The words landed like a blow. Adrian's shoulders sank. He covered his face with one hand, but no tears came, only silence. Eleanor returned to the table and pressed the intercom button on the wall. "Michael Reed," she said. "I want the legal transfer finalized today. Freeze all accounts under Adrian's name, and notify law enforcement that the recording will be submitted as evidence." "Nah?" "Yes, Mrs. Hale," came the lawyer's voice through the speaker. Adrian's head snapped up. "You called the police?" "Yes," she said. "This house will no longer hide the sins of powerful men." He took a step toward her, his voice rising. "You'd send your own son to prison? If that is what justice requires." The firmness in her tone silenced him. For the first time, she saw fear, not arrogance, in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak again, but she turned away, ending the conversation. "Go upstairs," she said to Martha, who stood trembling near the door. "Help Emma gather her things. She leaves in 10 minutes. When Martha hurried off, the house fell into a strange, expectant stillness. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. Eleanor stood beside the window, looking out at the wet garden. She could see the reflection of her son behind her in the glass, small and ghostly. "You can hate me," she said quietly. "You probably will. But one day, you will understand why I had to be the one to stop you." Adrian's voice cracked. "You think this will make her forgive you? Or me?" "This isn't about forgiveness," Eleanor said. "It's about accountability." Down the hall, the sound of footsteps approached. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, pale and weak, but standing. The doctor walked beside her. Eleanor turned, her expression softening. "The car is waiting," she said. Emma nodded. Her eyes met Adrian's only once, full of something too broken to name. He looked away. As they passed, Eleanor's hand brushed Emma's shoulder, a gesture of quiet protection. "You're safe now," she whispered. The front door opened. Morning light poured into the foyer. The air shifted, as if the house itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. Eleanor watched until the car disappeared beyond the gates, then closed the door with deliberate calm. When she turned back to her son, he was still standing where she had left him, his face drained of color, the table between them like a border neither could cross. "You're no longer the head of this family," she said softly, "and you will never again decide who gets to speak." Outside, a police siren sounded faintly in the distance, growing nearer. But Eleanor did not move. She only looked at Adrian one last time before walking toward the corridor. The strip of silver tape still glimmered faintly on the table as she passed. She did not touch it. The world found out before sunrise. By 6 in the morning, the 37-second video had been shared across every platform. The footage was shaky, grainy, pulled from the chandelier camera, but the image was unmistakable. Adrian Hale, once the darling of the financial world, stood before a room of dinner guests and pressed silver tape over his pregnant wife's mouth. The sound of her muffled gasp filled every news broadcast, every phone screen, every home that had ever believed the myth of his perfection. Within hours, the clip was playing on a loop across morning programs. Commentators spoke in rapid tones, their faces a mix of disbelief and moral outrage. "Domestic abuse behind luxury walls," one anchor declared. "A billionaire's dinner of shame," said another. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Number justice for Emma, number silver tape trial, number let her speak. In her office downtown, Eleanor Hale sat at her desk, watching the screen without blinking. She had given the footage to her attorney, Michael Reed, before dawn, and within an hour the world had done what she had quietly planned. She felt no triumph, only gravity. Around her, staff members moved in silence, answering phones that never stopped ringing. Every call brought another request for a statement, another invitation to appear live on camera. "Should I prepare a response?" Michael asked gently. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes," she said. "We will speak, but not to defend, to define." By mid-morning, the market opened and the Hale Group began to fall. Stock tickers on the news screens bled red. Partners withdrew, announcing temporary suspensions, pending investigation. A luxury brand that had used Adrian as its ambassador released a single line that echoed through every headline: "We do not collaborate with abusers." Inside his mansion, Adrian smashed his phone against the marble floor. "Who leaked it?" he shouted. Cassandra Voss flinched where she sat on the couch, her makeup smudged, her robe slipping off one shoulder. "Everyone's seen it, Adrian," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to respond. We can't just stay quiet." He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "Quiet is all they deserve. This will blow over." "It won't," Cassandra said. "They're calling you a monster. We need a narrative, something to make her look unstable, emotional. We can say she—" He turned on her, his face flushed with anger. "You think this is about her? This is about me." He slammed his hand on the table. "My reputation, my company, my name." Cassandra looked at him, and for the first time she saw what the world was now seeing. A man stripped of charm, desperate and hollow. She picked up her phone, scrolling through social media. Every post carried the same image of Emma at the table, silver across her mouth, eyes wide with tears. Underneath, comments flooded in. "She deserves justice. Lock him up. No one should have to live in silence." The phone buzzed with a new headline: "Eleanor Hale to hold press conference at noon." Cassandra's fingers froze. "Your mother's going public." Adrian stopped pacing. She wouldn't dare. At noon, cameras crowded the steps outside the Hale Foundation building. The sky had cleared to a washed-out blue, the kind of color that makes harsh light even sharper. Eleanor appeared in a navy suit, pearls at her throat, hair pinned neatly. The crowd quieted. Microphones rose like a forest before her. She did not read from a script. Her voice was steady, deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision. "I have watched the video as the world has," she said. "I will not defend what cannot be defended. Power means nothing if it cannot protect the vulnerable. Justice does not retire at 60. It only becomes wiser." The cameras clicked endlessly. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for anger or tears, but she gave them neither. "This is not a family matter," she continued. "This is a moral one. I will ensure that the truth is not buried under wealth or fear." By the time she stepped away, applause broke from the crowd. It was not loud, but it carried. That clip, too, began to circle the world. Back at the mansion, Adrian stood before the television, staring at his mother's face. The applause from the screen bled into the silence of the room. He switched channels, but every station was the same. His name, his crime, his mother's calm defiance. He hurled the remote against the wall, shattering it. Cassandra poured a drink with shaking hands. "She's turned everyone against you," she whispered. "She's old," he said. "They'll forget in a week." But even as he spoke, the world was remembering more. News outlets dug into old interviews, recording his arrogance, his polished cruelty disguised as confidence. Former employees began to speak. The story was no longer about one act of violence. It was about a pattern. By evening, Cassandra's face appeared online too. A still frame captured her expression at the dinner table, the faint smirk as Emma sat in tears. The caption read, "She watched and smiled." Within hours, she lost 2 major endorsement contracts. Her inbox filled with fury. She tried to post an explanation, then deleted it. Every word sounded hollow. Eleanor watched the storm unfold from her office window. Outside, journalists waited, shouting questions. She ignored them, focusing instead on the document before her, the launch plan for a new national campaign. Across the top, in bold letters, read, "Expose violence, let the truth speak." Beneath it was the black and white image from the video. The poster captured Emma's profile, the silver tape gleaming like a wound of light. Michael Reed stood beside her. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," she said. "This isn't just about him anymore. It's about every woman who was told to stay quiet." The following morning, the first posters appeared on billboards, buses, and building screens. Each one carried the same message. If silence hurts one woman, it endangers them all. On television, reporters discussed the campaign as Adrian watched from the dark of his study. He poured another drink, his hand trembling. His reflection wavered on the black screen of the TV before the channel lit up again. There she was, his mother, standing before another crowd, speaking with measured grace. "Let the world hear what silence sounds like," she said. The applause that followed filled the room. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, spilling into every corner of his house until it became unbearable. Adrian grabbed the remote, turned off the television, and the screen went black. For a moment, the silence returned, thick and suffocating. Then, from somewhere outside, came the faint echo of sirens approaching the city. He stood still, listening, while the dark glass of the blank screen reflected only his face, alone, distorted, and shrinking beneath the weight of the world's judgment. The morning air outside the Hale Group headquarters was electric. Reporters lined the marble steps, cameras mounted on their shoulders, microphones raised toward the glass doors. Traffic had stopped. People crowded the sidewalks, phones held high. A murmur rolled through the crowd like a low tide, waiting for something inevitable. Inside, the elevator doors opened with a metallic sigh. 2 officers from the city's elite investigative unit stepped out, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. They moved quietly, professionally, through the gleaming lobby where portraits of Adrian Hale once hung like trophies of ambition. The receptionist froze as they passed. One officer pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator rose without sound, except for the faint hum of tension. On the 32nd floor, Adrian was already pacing. He wore a tailored suit, but his tie hung loose and his collar was open. The night had left bruises under his eyes. His assistant stood near the desk, pale and trembling, clutching a tablet that kept flashing one headline after another. "Sir, the press is outside. They know." Adrian turned sharply. "Then tell them I'll make a statement later." Before she could reply, the elevator bell chimed. The 2 officers stepped into the hallway. Behind them came the sound of a dozen cameras rolling. Someone had leaked the timing of the arrest, and now every step was being recorded. "Mr. Adrian Hale?" one officer asked. His voice was calm, formal. "You are under arrest for domestic assault and endangerment of a pregnant spouse." The word struck like a gavel. The assistant gasped. Adrian froze, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. "You can't do this here," he said. "Not in front of—" "It has to be done here," the officer replied. The cameras outside the office door captured everything, the flash of handcuffs, the sudden flood of voices. Someone shouted his name. Another asked, "Do you regret it, Mr. Hale?" Adrian's jaw clenched, his face twisted between pride and disbelief. The officers guided him toward the elevator. As they stepped inside, the doors began to close, but not before a woman in the crowd yelled, "Let her speak!" The phrase cut through the air, echoing down the hall. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, the crowd outside had doubled. The doors slid open to a wall of sound, reporters shouting, people holding signs that read, "Silence is violence, justice for Emma, no more silver tape." The morning sun flashed against 1,000 camera lenses. Adrian blinked hard, the light stabbing his eyes. "Mr. Hale, is it true your mother released the video?" a journalist cried out. He didn't answer. His lips trembled, but no words came. He tried to lift his head, to hold the posture that once made people obey him, but the weight of the handcuffs dragged his arms just enough to break the illusion. The officers led him through the crowd to the waiting police car. Someone threw a newspaper at his feet. The headline in bold letters screamed, "Billionaire arrested for silencing his wife." As the car doors closed, cameras kept flashing. Through the tinted glass, Adrian saw his reflection layered over the swarm of reporters. For years, that face had sold confidence and control. Now it looked unfamiliar. The flash of each camera felt like lightning striking the last fragments of his name. Inside the car, the air smelled faintly of leather and metal. The younger officer sat beside him, eyes forward. Adrian leaned his head against the window, watching the blur of the city outside. People pointed as the vehicle passed. Their mouths moved, forming words he couldn't hear but knew too well. Guilty, monster, abuser. In the distance, enormous billboards for the Expose Violence campaign filled the skyline. The silver tape image glinted under the morning light. The same strip that had once sealed his wife's mouth now turned into a symbol across the nation. Beneath it were the words, "Let her speak." Silence is not peace. Adrian shut his eyes. The rhythm of the tires on the road became a pulse inside his skull. He saw flashes of the night before. Emma's eyes, Eleanor's voice, Cassandra's smirk turning to fear. Back at the foundation, Eleanor Hale watched the same scene unfold on a large screen. The press conference from the previous day played in split screen beside live footage of her son being led away. Her staff stood silently behind her. She said nothing for a long time. When Michael Reed entered, she finally spoke. "Has the statement been released?" "Yes," he said. "Every major outlet has it. Your quote is everywhere." Eleanor nodded. "Good." Her tone was steady, but her fingers tightened slightly around the pen she held. "Justice isn't vengeance. It's protection." She repeated the words softly, almost to herself. Outside her window, banners of the Expose Violence movement rippled in the wind. Volunteers were already gathering at the plaza below, holding signs with the campaign's slogan. A woman passed carrying a bouquet wrapped in silver ribbon. The sight made Eleanor close her eyes briefly. Across town, Cassandra Voss pushed through a crowd of photographers outside her apartment. Questions flew at her like stones. "Did you tell him to do it? Were you there when it happened? Do you regret smiling?" She kept her head down, her dark glasses slipping as flashes burst around her. The sound of shutters was deafening. Someone shouted. She watched and smiled. Now the world watches her. Her lips trembled. She didn't respond. She pushed into the waiting car, slammed the door, and disappeared behind tinted glass. But the photos spread within minutes. Her bowed head, her trembling hands, the caption already written, "The Mistress Who Lost Everything." Back in the newsroom, anchors narrated every frame of Adrian's downfall. Some called it poetic justice. Others said it was a reckoning. The broadcast screens flickered between his arrest, Cassandra's humiliation, and Eleanor's calm statement. By evening, news outlets displayed the final image that would define the moment. Adrian Hale, hands cuffed, stepping into the rain as police guided him toward the courthouse. Across the bottom of the screen, a caption glowed. "He silenced her once. Now the world silences him." Eleanor sat in her office, the only light coming from the television. She watched without moving. The rain outside her window began again, a thin, steady drizzle that blurred the city lights. Her reflection in the glass overlapped with the screen. Mother and son, two sides of the same story. Michael entered quietly. "It's done," he said. Eleanor nodded. "Not done," she replied. "Restored." She turned off the television. The screen went black, showing only her reflection. Outside, The rain grew heavier, washing the streets clean. She stood for a long time, staring at the city below. When she finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "This isn't revenge," she said. "It's restoration." And in the quiet that followed, the sound of rain filled the room, soft and endless, as if the world itself was breathing again. The studio lights were bright but not harsh. They made the air feel cleaner somehow, sharper, as if truth could live only in places where nothing could hide. Eleanor Hale sat across from the anchor of The Nation Speaks, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The host, a woman half her age, leaned forward with a practiced smile that did little to soften the weight of the question. "Mrs. Hale," she began carefully, "you have become the symbol of accountability, even toward your own family. What made you take such drastic action against your son?" The audience hushed. Eleanor met the reporter's gaze without blinking. "Because silence runs in families," she said slowly, "and it ran in mine for too long." For a second, the studio was completely still. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. The anchor blinked, unsure how to follow. "You mean there was violence before this?" Eleanor's voice was calm, almost tender. 40 years ago, I learned how to hide bruises under pearls. My husband was admired, respected, the face of Hale Industries in its earliest years. And he broke me quietly. One rib, then two. Once he left me unconscious on the kitchen floor. The doctor asked what happened. I told him I fell. Her hands didn't move, but her voice softened into something almost fragile. I thought silence would protect my son. I believed that if I didn't speak, he wouldn't learn cruelty. I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect, it repeats. The host lowered her eyes. Somewhere off camera, a technician exhaled audibly. Eleanor continued, her tone unwavering. I raised my son to be powerful, not kind. I thought I was protecting him from weakness, but I was raising another man who believed silence was strength. She turned slightly toward the camera, her gaze piercing through the lens. If you raise a child in a house where fear is never named, they will learn to speak its language fluently. The anchor whispered, and you broke that cycle. Ugh. Eleanor gave a small, sad smile. I didn't break it. I admitted it existed. That's all breaking takes, admitting that the pattern is real. The segment ended in silence. When the camera's red light went off, the crew remained motionless. Eleanor rose, thanked them politely, and walked off the set. Across the city, the interview played on a small television in a hospital room. Emma Hale sat propped against her pillows, one hand on her belly, the other holding a tissue she hadn't used. The glow from the screen illuminated her tired face. When Eleanor spoke about silence, Emma's throat tightened. She wasn't watching a powerful woman on TV. She was watching another survivor. Dr. Elise Brooks entered quietly, carrying a clipboard. You're still awake? Emma nodded without looking away. She's speaking for both of you now, the doctor said softly. Emma turned then, her eyes full. She's brave, she whispered. So are you. Outside, the morning sunlight slid across the hospital window, warm and gentle, painting the floor in pale gold. The heartbeat monitor beside the bed pulsed steadily, strong and even. Emma smiled faintly, pressing her palm to her stomach. Later that afternoon, Eleanor arrived at the hospital unannounced. She carried no cameras, no reporters, just a small bouquet of white lilies tied with a silver ribbon. The nurse led her to the maternity wing. The faint scent of antiseptic and flowers hung in the corridor. When she entered the room, Emma started to rise, but Eleanor lifted a hand. Don't move, she said softly. Emma hesitated, her eyes wide, then slowly sank back against the pillow. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was deep, like the pause before a confession. Eleanor set the bouquet on the table, then moved closer to the bed. You owe me nothing, she said, but you owe yourself freedom. Zen. Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks. I don't know what freedom looks like anymore, she whispered. Eleanor sat beside her, folding her hands gently over Emma's. It looks like this, she said, breathing without permission. Emma's breath hitched, then steadied. The monitor beside them echoed the rhythm, slow and steady. Eleanor glanced at the screen, the small heartbeat flashing in green. That sound, she said quietly, is everything he tried to silence. Don't ever let anyone turn it off. Yen. Emma nodded, tears falling freely now. I thought I was alone. Eleanor's voice softened even more. So did I. But silence is crowded, my dear. It's full of women who thought the same thing. They sat like that for a while. Two hands joined across generations. The air smelled faintly of lilies and disinfectant. When Eleanor finally stood to leave, she brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. Rest, she said. You're safe now. Emma caught her wrist. You didn't fail me, she said, her voice trembling. You stopped him. Eleanor froze, her throat tightening. She wanted to speak, to deny it, but words failed. Instead, she just nodded and squeezed Emma's hand once before turning away. Out in the corridor, the polished floor reflected her steps. As she passed a large mirror, she caught her reflection, and in its depth, faintly, the outline of Emma's face still visible through the glass door behind her. Two women, one reflection. For a moment, they almost looked the same age. That evening, Eleanor stood before a hall of university students. She had been invited to speak on leadership and accountability. She stepped up to the podium without notes. Her voice carried effortlessly through the auditorium. Power that hides abuse is corruption, she said. Power that admits it becomes legacy. The students rose in a standing ovation, their applause echoing like rain on glass. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, not smiling, just breathing it in. Later, she returned to her office. The building was empty, the city outside quiet. She turned on the small television on her desk, watching the replay of her morning interview. The screen's glow touched the framed photos beside it, her late husband's stern face, and Adrian as a child in her arms. She picked up the photo of the boy, ran her thumb over his smile. Cycle broken, she whispered. For the first time, the words didn't feel like loss. They felt like release. Outside, night settled gently over the hospital and the city. Emma slept peacefully, her hand resting on her belly, the faint beeping of the monitor steady and calm. Eleanor left her office and walked out into the cool air. The streets were damp from earlier rain, glistening under the streetlights. She got into her car, closed the door, and turned on the radio. The announcer's voice floated softly. The public now calls Eleanor Hale, the woman who stood where silence once ruled. Eleanor looked up through the windshield. The sky was dark but clear. A single star flickered above the city skyline. She allowed herself the smallest smile, quiet, steady, almost weightless. The camera lingered on her reflection in the glass. The faint glimmer of light caught in her eyes, before fading slowly to black. The courthouse stood like a monument of glass and stone against the gray morning. The sky above was low and heavy, pressing down on the crowd that gathered at its steps. Reporters swarmed in a blur of cameras and microphones, their voices weaving together in a restless chorus. Inside, security officers guided people through metal detectors, their faces composed but their movements quick. The trial everyone called the silver tape case was about to begin. Eleanor Hale entered quietly through the side door. She wore a black coat, her silver hair tied back, her face calm and unreadable. The world had begun to treat her as a symbol, but she carried herself like someone who had no interest in glory. Michael Reed walked beside her, briefcase in hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. Justice doesn't wait for readiness. In the main hall, the marble floor gleamed under the bright lights. On the left, reporters filled every bench, their pens poised. On the right, citizens and victims of abuse sat shoulder to shoulder, some holding small placards that read, "Justice has a voice." When the bailiff called the room to order, a hush rippled through the air. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Adrian Hale sat at the defense table, shoulders stiff, his hands clasped. The navy suit he wore could not disguise the gray under his eyes. Cassandra Voss sat behind him with her attorney, her face pale and drawn, her hair pinned too tightly as if restraint could still hold dignity in place. The prosecutor, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady tone, approached the jury. "This case," she began, "is not about wealth. It is about control, about a woman's right to breathe." The room fell still. She pressed a button on a small console. The monitors around the courtroom flickered to life. The grainy footage from the chandelier camera began to play. The audience gasped as the image appeared. Adrian standing over Emma, silver tape in his hand, the muffled sound of her cry echoing through the speakers. The video ended abruptly. Silence followed. The prosecutor spoke again. "He silenced her. The law will not." Adrian looked down, his throat tight. Cassandra closed her eyes. Michael Reed stood to present the evidence Eleanor's team had gathered. His voice was calm, precise. "The footage you just saw is one piece of truth," he said. "There are others. Records of manipulation, bank transfers made to media agencies, witnesses who were silenced. Tonight, those voices return." He clicked through slides on the screen. Emails, contracts, a list of payments made to suppress the story. "Power used to silence," he said, "is no longer power, it is evidence." Eleanor watched from her seat. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers steady. Every word was a mirror to the years she had spent pretending that silence was safety. Then came the witnesses. Martha Lewis, the longtime housekeeper, walked slowly to the stand. Her hands trembled as she took the oath. "I saw it," she said, her voice quivering. Everyone saw it, but only she stopped him. Her gaze flicked toward Eleanor. "She saved that girl's life." The judge thanked her. Martha stepped down, wiping her eyes. Next, the prosecutor called Eleanor herself. The courtroom cameras turned. She stood, smoothing her coat, and approached the stand. The oath felt unnecessary. Her truth was already carved into her face. "I stand here not as a CEO or a widow," she began. "I stand as a mother who failed to speak in time." Her voice was low, steady, but it carried through the entire room. "My silence raised a man who believed fear was strength, but fear is only the absence of love." She turned toward Adrian, whose eyes lifted reluctantly to meet hers. "Forgiveness," she said, "is earned, not inherited." He lowered his head, a tear slipping down his cheek before he could stop it. For the first time, he didn't speak. When the defense called Cassandra, she tried to maintain poise. Her lawyer guided her through the expected denials. "Did you instruct Mr. Hale to harm his wife?" "No," she said quickly. "Never." The prosecutor pressed a button. The speakers came alive with a single sentence, Cassandra's voice, unmistakable. "If you love me, make her stop." Gasps filled the room. Cassandra froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Adrian shut his eyes. "It was a mistake," he whispered. The prosecutor turned to him. "No, Mr. Hale, it was a decision." The words hung like a final verdict before the actual one. Hours passed. The testimonies ended. The courtroom dimmed as afternoon light faded through the high windows. The judge re-entered after deliberation. The clerk's voice trembled slightly as he read the decision. "The court finds the defendant, Adrian Hale, guilty on all counts." The sentence: 7 years in federal prison with mandatory rehabilitation and public service focused on domestic violence awareness. The murmur that followed was low but filled with relief. Cassandra received 2 years of probation and mandatory community work for aiding the crime. She nodded through silent tears. There was no applause, only a stillness that felt sacred. Eleanor exhaled softly. Her lawyer leaned close. 7 years, he said quietly. "That's mercy." She nodded. "Justice doesn't destroy, it corrects." Adrian lifted his eyes to her once more. For a fleeting second, she saw not the man he had become, but the boy he once was, standing in the backyard holding a kite. The memory stung like sunlight after too long in the dark. She turned away before it could weaken her resolve. The guards led Adrian from the courtroom. The chains around his wrists clinked faintly, the sound small but absolute. Outside, the crowd waited, holding banners and cameras. The heavy doors opened, and light poured in. Eleanor stepped forward first. Flashes erupted. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Hale, do you think 7 years is enough?" She stopped, turned her face toward the question. "If a man can learn compassion in 7 years," she said, "it will be worth eternity." The crowd went silent. She descended the courthouse steps slowly, sunlight glinting off her silver hair. At the bottom, Emma stood among the people, pale but strong, her hands folded over her belly. Their eyes met. Eleanor's chin lifted slightly in acknowledgement. Emma's lips trembled into a faint smile. Behind them, the giant television screen on the courthouse wall displayed the breaking headline, "Justice Delivered, Silver Tape Trial Ends." The anchor's voice spoke over the footage. "The law has spoken, and for the first time in months, silence means peace." The camera lingered on Eleanor's face as she turned her eyes to the sky, the light catching her features, softening them. Then the screen faded to black. The clicking of cameras continued, echoing like distant rain, a final reminder that truth, once spoken, never disappears. The prison cell was smaller than Adrian Hale had imagined. The walls were a dull gray, chipped at the corners, the single window high and narrow. Every morning at 7, sunlight touched the edge of the concrete floor for just 5 minutes before moving on. He sat at the small metal table, staring at that patch of light as if it might speak to him. The radio on his desk hummed faintly. It played the morning news, and the announcer's voice filled the silence. Eleanor Hale's foundation, Expose Violence, has expanded to 12 more states, the voice said. The program provides housing and counseling for victims of domestic abuse. Mrs. Hale declined to comment, saying only that justice must continue where fear once lived. Adrian turned off the radio. The hum lingered in his ears. He leaned back on the chair, eyes half closed. He had once ruled over skyscrapers, boardrooms, and markets. Now his world measured 8 steps across, 5 steps long. He whispered the words his mother had said on the courthouse steps. "If a man can learn compassion in 7 years, it will be worth eternity," the sentence echoed in the stillness. He didn't know if compassion could be learned, but silence had finally taught him something about loneliness. Outside the walls of the prison, the world moved on. In the Hale Foundation's main office, sunlight filtered through tall windows. Eleanor sat at her desk reviewing reports. A framed photograph on the wall showed Emma surrounded by women from the Expose Violence initiative. Their faces were calm but strong, standing in front of the banner that read, "Let the Truth Speak." Eleanor studied the photo for a moment, her fingers resting on the edge of the paper. There was no pride in her gaze, only quiet peace. Across the city, Cassandra Voss stood in a small apartment that overlooked an alleyway. The curtains were thin, and the morning light fell harshly across her face. She had cut her hair short. The glossy curls that once framed her beauty were gone, replaced by simplicity. On the table beside her was a phone that never rang, its cracked screen still showing unread messages filled with rage and pity. Every morning, she walked to a women's shelter, where she worked as part of her community service. She cleaned the floors, organized boxes of donated clothes, and tried not to look at her reflection in the windows. One afternoon, a woman approached her, a thin woman with a bruised cheek and tired eyes. "Weren't you the one from that video?" the woman asked gently. Cassandra hesitated, her fingers tightening around a folded towel. "Yes," she said. "I was. I'm trying to learn what silence really costs." The woman nodded slowly, as if she understood more than words could explain. At Street Helena's hospital, Emma lay in a bed surrounded by soft light. Her newborn daughter, Grace, slept beside her, wrapped in a pale blanket. The world outside the window was full of movement, but inside the room, everything was still. When Eleanor entered, she carried a small teddy bear, its fur white and worn from her own childhood. Emma smiled faintly. "Her name means mercy," she said. Eleanor looked at the sleeping baby. "Then she carries what we all needed." Neither woman spoke for a while. They watched the baby's tiny chest rise and fall. The rhythm of her breathing was the only sound, steady and pure. Months passed. The headlines faded, but the legacy remained. The Expose Violence program grew into a nationwide movement. Universities taught it as a model of restorative justice. Commentators called it the turning point. One columnist wrote, "Justice began as punishment but ended as education." Eleanor read the article in a small cafe one morning. She folded the newspaper neatly, placed it aside, and stirred her coffee. No smile crossed her lips, only quiet acceptance. In the prison's rehabilitation room, Adrian sat among other inmates. They were learning to write letters, simple, honest letters. The counselor handed him a blank sheet of paper. "Write to someone you owe truth," she said. His hand trembled as he wrote, "Mother, you were right. Silence was my crown and my cage." He paused, unable to continue. The pen hovered above the page, but no more words came. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the worn Bible on his desk. It stayed there, unsent. Outside the prison, the days turned golden. Autumn returned. In the city park, Emma pushed a stroller along the path. The dappled sunlight fell through the trees, warming her face. Grace giggled as the breeze lifted the silver ribbon tied to the handle of her stroller. The ribbon fluttered in the wind, shining softly. A fragment of silver tape transformed into something gentle, something alive. Eleanor watched from a distance, her coat buttoned against the breeze. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. The sight was enough. At the foundation office, Martha Lewis, once a housekeeper, now worked as a coordinator. She organized case files with care, her posture straighter than before. When Michael Reed brought in another folder of sponsorships, she smiled. "Every time a woman walks in here, I see her sit straighter," she said. Eleanor looked up from her desk. "Because this place lets them breathe." The day ended quietly. The city lights flickered on one by one. That evening, Eleanor drove alone to the old Hale mansion. It had been empty since the trial. The driveway was covered in fallen leaves, and the grand windows reflected the sunset. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Dust floated in the fading light. The echo of her footsteps was soft against the marble floor. She walked slowly through the hall, past the dining room, up the staircase. Her hand brushed the wooden railing. The house smelled of time and absence. When she reached the 5th step, she stopped. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she opened her purse and took out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of Adrian as a child, grinning, his hair tousled, holding a kite against the wind. She placed the envelope on the 5th step and whispered, "Forgiveness doesn't erase. It just teaches you how to walk again." The last light of day slipped through the window, touching the envelope and the railing. A faint breeze stirred the dust, and the air shimmered. Eleanor turned away. She walked down the hall toward the open door. Outside, the evening sky glowed in soft amber. Behind her, the stairway remained still. The envelope lay where she had left it, catching the thin line of sunlight that stretched across the floor. From somewhere beyond the walls, the distant laughter of children drifted through the air, faint but clear, like a promise that the world still knew how to heal. The light lingered a little longer on the 5th step, warm and forgiving, before fading gently into dusk. The morning sunlight spread across the courtyard like a gentle blessing. The new sign above the entrance gleamed in gold letters, "Hope Foundation for Women and Children, founded in memory of the women who could not speak." White lilies framed the path, and rows of pale blue hydrangeas moved softly in the wind. The crowd that gathered was small this time. No reporters shouting, no cameras flashing, only quiet voices and the hum of new beginnings. Eleanor Hale stood near the entrance, wearing a light gray suit and a pearl brooch. Her hair, white and fine, glowed beneath the sunlight. She watched as volunteers arranged ribbons on the trees. Each ribbon shimmered silver, tied with care. For the first time in years, she felt the world was breathing again. Emma arrived a few minutes later, dressed in a simple ivory dress. She carried her daughter Grace on her hip. The little girl reached out toward the flowers, laughing when petals brushed her tiny fingers. The crowd turned to look, smiling. The child's presence softened the morning, as if the air itself paused to admire her. When Emma reached Eleanor, they didn't speak right away. They simply looked at each other, both smiling faintly. Grace wriggled, reaching for the silver bracelet on her mother's wrist. It glinted when the sun touched it, the same bracelet that had once been fashioned from the remnants of the old silver tape. Now, instead of silence, it reflected light. Eleanor bent closer, her voice tender. "She looks like hope." Emma smiled. "She is." The ceremony began quietly. A few chairs had been placed beneath a large cherry tree in bloom. The petals drifted in the wind, soft as falling snow. The audience, survivors, supporters, students, sat waiting. Eleanor stepped onto the small stage, holding a folded sheet of notes but not glancing down. "Justice built the bridge," she said, her voice clear. "Compassion will keep it standing." A soft wave of applause followed, not loud or thunderous, just steady and full of meaning. Eleanor looked across the audience, seeing familiar faces. Women who had come through the foundation's doors, volunteers who had stayed. Then her eyes found Emma again, standing near the cherry tree, Grace in her arms. "The future," Eleanor continued, "belongs to those who learned from silence. We cannot change what was done, but we can decide what grows from it." As she spoke, the wind lifted the silver ribbons tied to the branches. They shimmered in the sunlight, hundreds of them, fluttering like fragments of light breaking free. It was as if the ghosts of silence had turned into wings. Later, after the speeches ended and people mingled quietly, small moments unfolded around the garden. Cassandra Voss stood at the registration table, guiding a young woman through paperwork. Her hair was tied back, her face unpainted, her smile small but real. Nearby, Michael Reed spoke with a group of students about expanding outreach programs. On his desk inside the office sat a photo of Eleanor and Emma shaking hands on the day the foundation opened. Even Adrian's presence lingered, though he was miles away. In the prison classroom, he sat among other inmates, teaching them how to read. A faint smile crossed his face as he handed a notebook to a younger man. In the margin of the notebook, a quote was written in careful script: "Justice doesn't destroy, it corrects." Back in the courtyard, Emma sat with Eleanor beneath the cherry tree. Grace played nearby on the grass, her laughter high and pure. The sun glinted off the ribbon she clutched in her tiny fist, a strip of silver that caught the light and tossed it back into the air. Eleanor leaned back, watching her. "If we had arrived earlier," she murmured, her voice soft with reflection. Emma shook her head gently. "We arrived when it mattered." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt full, not empty. Around them, children ran through the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. The world no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a second chance. As the afternoon faded, volunteers gathered the chairs, and the courtyard emptied slowly. Eleanor stayed behind, walking to the center of the garden where a new tree had been planted. The hope tree. Its branches were still thin, but hundreds of silver ribbons hung from them, catching the sunset. A little girl with freckles stepped forward, holding a microphone that was almost too big for her hands. "This ribbon," she said shyly, "is not for silence, it's for hope." Applause rose again, quiet but heartfelt. Eleanor smiled. The wind stirred the branches, and the ribbons danced, shimmering like 1,000 heartbeats under the fading light. As the crowd drifted away, the garden grew still. Eleanor remained under the tree, watching the ribbons sway. The silver that had once been a symbol of pain now glittered with beauty. Emma joined her, Grace toddling between them, taking her first unsteady steps. The child stumbled once, then laughed, holding out her hands. The silver ribbon trailed behind her, fluttering like a banner. Eleanor and Emma both reached forward instinctively, ready to catch her, but Grace steadied herself on her own. The sight drew a soft laugh from Eleanor. "She's stronger than we ever were," she said quietly. Emma nodded. "Because she never learned fear." Eleanor's gaze lingered on the child. "And because we stopped teaching it." The sky turned gold, then rose, then deepened toward violet. The foundation building glowed with soft interior lights. The words, "Hope Foundation," illuminated above the doors. Eleanor held Grace in her arms as the little girl played with her pearl brooch. Emma sat beside them, her eyes glistening in the evening light. Eleanor whispered to Grace, her voice a mix of strength and warmth, "The world will never be silent again, my little one. Not while you're in it." Grace looked up, cooing softly, her tiny fingers brushing against the silver bracelet that gleamed between them. The last rays of sunlight spread across the courtyard, turning every ribbon into a thread of gold. The camera pulled back slowly. The cherry tree swayed in the wind, petals falling around them like snow. Children's laughter blended with the breeze, carrying a sense of completion that no words could capture. As the screen faded, a narrator's voice, calm and resolute, filled the quiet. Once, silence was forced. Now, it's chosen, and that makes all the difference. The image held for a moment longer, silver ribbons glimmering in the wind, a grandmother, a mother, and a child framed by light, before everything dissolved into the glow of sunset, leaving only peace.